So I've kind of been encouraged to do this over the years, and I think now is probably a very good time to start, given my attempts to outreach and try all, I guess, channels. But something lately, in the midst of all the chaos, has been coming to my attention. It's not necessarily new. It's not necessarily cropping up in the middle of the night. It's definitely not something I haven't discussed before. But as ye old Rona continues to rage on, and we sit and debate over whether a catastrophic second wave is coming, and we debate whether a focus shift is justification to lock society down again, I have to ask a very important question. What about mental health? You see, mental health has always kind of been there. It's always kind of been a factor. And in recent years, despite numerous attempts to get people to talk about it, it's just kind of raged on in the background. And as the Rona continues to be the focus of pretty much everybody, and trust me, it is the focus of everybody, whether people want to continue discussing it or not. It's practically unavoidable at this point, and I think people are tiring of that. People want to escape. People want to run away. And the most interesting thing that I'm seeing about this is that people are getting mentally exhausted. Well, over the course of the last several years, we've kind of had a bit of a mental health crisis. And it's always loomed in the background. People have never truly wanted to address it. I've brought it up in several situations, several discussions, various different scenarios. Anytime a gun seems to be involved, people regularly discuss mental health, but I try to make it more of a discussion. I don't just wait until the next shooting. I've been trying to push this discussion as a political and policy-oriented approach for a number of years. I've had discussions on the subject about the very subject matter of how bad a crisis it's become with people that aren't even politically tied to me. And it's this very problem that has connected me to at least 3 people in my life. But something that interests me and intrigues me is that even in the middle of a pandemic that is dominating everyone's life, you can't escape it. Obviously, mental health would have a wear, and mental exhaustion might just break some people, particularly in a pandemic, so I wouldn't expect it to disappear, but it's overly prominent. It's not just a background notion. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Across my wall over the last several months, however long we've been primarily dealing with this, I have seen numerous posts by numerous people, some of whom I knew in high school, some of whom I knew in college. Both seem entirely interested in expressing how prominent COVID-19 is. I've seen comments that are intriguing, to say the least. A noteworthy standout comment was made by a friend of a friend when he said that COVID-19 is unlike any kind of virus he's ever seen before. And the reason for this statement was because he knew several people over the years that had the flu. Hell, as I stand here telling you about everything that I'm talking about, I'm pretty convinced that at one point I had the swine flu. And he says that even though people have had the flu over the years, he knows maybe one person ever to have passed away from it. Most people fight it. Most people beat it. He said in just the last 2 months of this raging pandemic, he knows 9 people that have had COVID-19, and one of them, an elderly, and 2 of them, not one, an elderly couple, passed away from it. 3 others ended up with more extreme, moderate conditions to the point they had a hell of a fight just to bounce back. He said the one person that died from the flu could have potentially died from the circumstances of how he got the flu, as he was an older person. And as we're finding out with COVID-19, the older people generally have weakened and compromised immune systems. On the flip side, COVID-19 has torn up 5 of the 9 people that he knows, and 2 of them have died. It's not like any virus he's ever seen. Others have made comments about numerous incidents where this virus is killing people. And at this point, it kind of humors me when people still say, it's just a seasonal flu. Not yet. I say not yet because I'm convinced that it will become a form of seasonal flu. But that's because it'll be prevalent enough to be a constant throughout society. And if it mutates to any degree where it becomes seasonal, honestly, I think we'll start building regular immunity to it, and it'll just become a seasonal flu. The reason I say it like that is because there's always the flu season. Everyone knows the kind of death tolls that it brings. Everyone knows the kind of contagion factor that it has. Everyone knows when it's coming. Everyone knows when it's hitting. Right now, this virus is still kind of unpredictable. We can predict certain factors. We can determine certain factors. We've determined that mass amounts of heat and great amounts of fresh air can substantially cripple this thing to the point that at bare minimum you don't end up in the hospital, as has been the case in most scenarios. But there's still a couple tweaks here and there. There's still a couple things that we haven't really worked out. But as we continue to move forward, I do believe it will move seasonal. And the problem with seasonal is that people often forget how deadly and dangerous the flu actually is. Flu pandemics happen every so often. People like to point out when they happen and apparently why they happen, but it's the fact that they happen that's noteworthy. Obviously, the last flu pandemic we had, in terms of comparison, probably wasn't as bad as this has turned out to be. And I'm not even going to get into a discussion about it beyond that. But I've seen countless numbers of people talk about how they've seen the fatality of COVID-19. And I'm here to say that I've seen it too. At least one person that I knew of, didn't know personally, but knew of them, and at least one person that I knew directly, worked with, stood next to, was a great person, helped me a lot. At least one person that I knew and one that I knew of are currently considered to be casualties of COVID-19. So why, you might ask, am I discussing the possibility that maybe we shouldn't be heavily focused on the virus at hand? Because in the last, well, let's say the first 6 months of the year, since we're closing in on that mid-month time frame of June, and now on the back end of the month, which would be the 6th month of the year, obviously, in the 6 months of 2020 that 2020 has happened, I've seen to date 2 that I just mentioned deaths from COVID-19. I've seen 1 death of someone from poor medical conditions. I've seen 1 death of someone from a drunk driving incident. I didn't know the person personally, but was informed about it after the fact. And then I've seen 3 deaths. So, in the 6 months that we've been dealing with all of this, obviously it hasn't been a full 6 months, I have seen 3 deaths from something else. Which means that in terms of total deaths, COVID-19 currently falls in second. And what's really crazy is that the 3 deaths are all related to COVID-19. So it's not even the full 6 months that we're talking about. It's only during the pandemic itself. 3 deaths versus 2 from COVID-19. So what is this mystery category that ranks number 1 in who I've seen die? Well, obviously you've probably guessed what it is, but it's mental health. I've seen 3 people die in regards to mental health. A friend of a friend, as in a personal friend of mine, had one of their friends who believed it was the end of the world back in March, April, kill herself. She literally took an entire bottle of aspirin. That's not really something you come back from. Another friend of mine had one of their family members get so mentally destroyed by this that they quit caring if they lived, to the point that they just didn't want to anymore. So they quit eating. And they ended up in critical condition from it. And they didn't make it. Another happened to be in New York at the time. And the pressure of all of it, everything around them, everything that was going on, just kinda they're now brain dead. That's 3 people. 3 people that actually did it. That's the crazy part. I could show you at least 5 different incidents where mental health was taking a wear on someone. People trying to be optimistic, they're just giving up hope. They're losing it. Internally, they're losing it. They're barely holding on. There was a woman across my Facebook wall. I don't know how we became friends. I know politically we align, but I couldn't tell you how we became friends. Posted a Facebook video on her wall where she literally broke down in tears because her mental state was collapsing. And thus I must ask, what about mental health? You see, the hype around this virus has kind of led people to think that this is the only thing that matters. This is the only thing we need to care about anymore. This is the only thing moving forward that we need to address. The rest of 2020 is nothing but this. Except when it wasn't. Just a month ago, nobody cared about it. There's pictures from Texas that would scare people. Arm in arm, half of them maskless. Black lives matter. So, unless Texas falls off the map, I think it's safe to say that even if we see some kind of extreme response from this thing to what we did, it's probably not nearly the level of problem that a lot of you seem to believe and hype it to be. And that's a problem because of how much it's dominating everything. How much everything seems to hinge on that. People living their lives. We can't have that. Force them all in masks. What about the places where like masks may not be doing much? They're still seeing a surge in cases. Shut it down. Lock it all down. So are we literally just gonna like keep locking society down for the next 3 years? If that's what it takes. Something you like to say, and I'm kind of tired of hearing, is the phrase, it doesn't matter the cost if it saves just one life. What about the other lives? What about the lives that I just mentioned? What about those lives? Those lives could have been saved if you weren't a dictator about lockdowns. What about all of the problems you're just kind of putting off to the side? And a lot of you are not using a rational way of thinking. Some of you are. I must give credit to several of you. I've made posts on my own Facebook wall about how many of you seem to be on top of what you think we should address. You've made your case, you've pleaded your point, you've made your argument. Maybe such and such thing and such thing need to take a back seat because this is something we can focus on right now. Until we get some kind of answer to this, put those aside for a minute. Put those aside. Don't put those away. Put those aside. Meaning that eventually you're going to have to get back around to them. And I applaud those that acknowledge that. But I've seen some really intelligent, with emphasis, people make some really dumb statements. It doesn't matter the cost. The virus is such a problem. Economy be damned. Economy be what? Economy be damned? I don't think that's going to work how you think it is. You see, because let's say economy be damned, and we put all of our efforts and pour them all into this vaccine effort, that there's some kind of drug that cures something, anything, medication that might make it like the flu, you just like something. Okay, when you go to give this miracle thing to people, how are you going to do that? First off, assuming you just give it to people, no financial backing behind it whatsoever, like that means someone's gonna have to financially carry the burden and the weight. Like, shit doesn't just pop up for free. It should. Spare me it. Spare me that discussion. You live in the real world, not the fake world. And in the real world, at bare minimum, you gotta have the money to get the resources. There's no way in hell you could just like get all the resources. Like, let's say they find out like diamonds have some kind of effect on it. This is a completely exaggerated example, but let's say they find out diamonds have some kind of effect on it. Who the fuck's gonna get the diamonds? Diamonds just don't pop out of thin air. You gotta go mine them. Free or not, that's a cost. At bare minimum, a labor cost. You're not thinking larger picture here. Plus, let's assume that this is the route we decide to go. Make it as free as possible. Who are you going to give it to? If you just put everyone on hold for like 2 years, they're saying that things will be quicker than that, but let's worst case scenario, shall we? If you just put everything on hold for 2 years, the food supply chain is already broken. You're going to be out of food by the end of 2020, continuing with the current system. You got to do something, man. You can't just like keep it in eternal lockdown and hope it just like goes away on its own. It's like sitting in a dog cage or a dog kennel and hoping that when someone sprays water onto the cage, it won't come through the holes in the cage and hit you in the face. I got news. About 99% of the time, you're going to be smacked in the face with water. And I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. They found out that almost 85% of the most recent patients and victims of COVID-19 in the hospitals didn't leave. Almost 20% of them, I think it was 18 or 19%, were in nursing homes, which are totally locked down. And then a good 2/3, 66% of them were staying home. And if you looked closer into the data, these people weren't leaving their home. There were cases where some of them were just sitting there for 3 weeks at a time between trips to the grocery store. And you got to look at this, and you got to start asking the questions. What are you talking about? Economy be damned. Focus all efforts on this. You can't. I'm sorry to tell you, but you can't. You live in the real world, not a fantasy world. And no matter how you look at it, if you just destroy everything around you to focus all efforts on the fucking virus, what kind of life are you gonna have? They're predicting that some of the damage done to the meat supply chain won't be fixed until the end of 2020, assuming we get shit back up and running, because of the way they gotta like fix the meat plants, because of the fact that they were like piling dead pigs up in a farm field and euthanizing them and killing them because there was nowhere to send them. There was nothing to do with them. So, I'm not entirely following your thought process. but you can kind of follow mine. Why don't we address the problems that we have when we have them? Since the virus is going to be a more long-term problem, I feel like we could set it aside for a little while. Just like you say that we can set everything else aside for a little while. Is this not rational thought? Am I not using logic? It comes down to the fact that at the end of the day, you're gonna have to address both. So if you're one of these intellectuals claiming we can just ignore one of these factors and somehow fixing the other factor will fix everything, you're not really making sense. And I'm kind of sorry I had to be the one to tell you that. But what we're finding out right now, as is the point of this video, is we're creating a lot of unintended consequences by having this be too much of a focal point. As it currently stands, this thing is not even close to the beast we've made it out to be. I'm not saying let it get to the point that it is the beast we made it out to be. I'm just saying maybe we should treat it a little bit more reasonably. Maybe we should start addressing some of the unintended consequences in the meantime. Let the doctors and the scientists do the doctor and the scientist stuff. Let the rest of us do the economy, because we are the economy. And maybe, just maybe, in the process of doing this, we might see mental health improve. If not, then maybe it's time to have that conversation I've been trying to make happen for a really long time. Let me know what you think we should do, because I'm open to suggestions contrary to what many think.